Good afternoon, everybody. We're just waiting for everybody to come on in and then we'll get started really promptly. Okay, I think I'll get started, Nadine, and then anybody else can join us.
No problem.
So good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for coming so much to the official launch of the Lassies and No Feart, our newest report from No Knives, Better Lives, all about understanding violence between girls in Scotland. So I'm here with my colleague Nadine Daly. We're on the No Knives, Better Lives team, which is run by YouthLink Scotland, the national agency for youth work and the collective voice of the youth work sector. The programme itself is funded by the Scottish Government, and we take a explicitly youth work and public health approach to our work. Really importantly for us, we work in partnership with young people and practitioners to understand and address the drivers of youth violence. And you'll see in a second why that was really important in this project. So about 18 months ago, there were practitioners within the No Knives network that started reporting to us that there was an increased frequency and severity of violence, specifically between girls. We knew this wasn't reflected in official statistics, either through kind of crime and police reporting or through research done with young people, including our own. Within our own Imagine a Man research, girls were found to be less involved in risky, violent behaviour than boys. But we knew we needed to talk to girls to find out what was actually going on, and coming back to that, working in partnership with young people. And we wanted this to really add to that picture of our gendered lens on youth violence prevention. Like I mentioned, our Imagine a Man project, which is all about building positive masculinity with boys and young men. We were really thinking, well, where are girls in this? How are girls doing? And how do the reports of practitioners match up with the reality for girls and young women? So we conducted 4 focus groups with young women and 4 practitioner interviews that were carried out between May and December last year. Once we'd done that first round of data collection, we then held 2 additional workshops with young women to analyse and explore the data from that first part of the collection, and then 1 workshop as well with practitioners to look at that data. And the young women in those workshops also helped us to fill some of the gaps, for example, about a little bit of future looking. And it was a kind of creative session that we did with them. So actually the hand lettering and the colours and some of the doodles are all kind of inspired and coming from those workshops with the young women.
And the young women we worked with had a lasting impact on Emily and I. They were brave, they were loyal friends, protective of their families, and really funny as well. And for the majority of them, violence was something that was woven into their lives through exposure on social media, through involvement in physical violence with other people, and occasionally adults as well. The young people we spoke to had caused harm, but they'd also been harmed themselves. So that line was very much blurred. And hopefully those that have got a chance to read the report already will have seen that we've tried to stay true to the young people that we spoke to. So there is just a little disclaimer that throughout the presentation it will contain themes of violence, misogyny, self-harm and offensive language as well. When speaking with them, we grouped them into 3 different themes. So the first one we're going to look at is relationship, support and community. The young people spoke a lot about their relationships with their family and their friends, who they had really strong loyalties to, which wasn't always a positive thing. This sometimes led to violence in terms of the pressures they felt from their family and friends, as well as wanting to, that kind of protective wanting to stick up for them. There was a strong theme of support that they were wanting, and some of them were lacking from adults, with multiple of the different groups mentioning the feeling that they almost had to get to a crisis point before an adult would do something, or they had to continually go back to them in order for them to take that action. They also spoke about the lack of community spaces, so they felt that when going in groups with their friends, they didn't really feel welcome within many community spaces, especially if youth centres were shut, being turned away from places like McDonald's, shopping centres. just people kind of fearing that group mentality of young people. They felt as if, like I said before, they felt as if sometimes when raising issues to adults, it was brushed over or not taken seriously, or nothing was being done about it. And that led to many of the young people taking things into their own hands and resulting in violence. They also felt as if some of their families actually supported or encouraged violence, and particularly they mentioned mothers, and that where they were expected to stand up for themselves, stand up for their families. There was a theme across the groups of people slagging off their families. That was raised as a common trigger for violence. Again, that loyalty, that sense of needing to stand up for the people that they cared for, came really across, came across came across really strongly in the groups.
And when we talked about relationships with other adults within their lives, when they were speaking about the police, in particular campus officers as well, their relationships were generally negative. And that was all to do with kind of consistency a lot of the time. If they knew someone was going to be there, if they understood how they were going to respond, that relationship tended to be more positive. Within friendships, young people expected each other to stand up for them. That meant if they were in an argument or some kind of a conflict, they expected their friends to also step in, even if that involved physical violence. And I think it's worth saying that. All of the girls really presented that they were trying to help each other, but they really didn't have the tools. They were all going through very similar issues. They didn't have that kind of distance from the issue to be able to support each other well, which again led to some instances of physical violence. The second theme is the perceptions of and influences on violence. So this is where really girls were telling us about their local areas predominantly, and where they knew there to be violence, where they felt were particularly unsafe or dangerous areas, and thinking about the things that kind of contributed to violence, experiencing violence. And really, the young women perceived there to be lots of violence in their lives. For those within areas that were kind of on the periphery of cities or in cities, they felt city centres were particularly dangerous and unsafe. They knew that, for example, there were less safe spaces for young people to go, and there were particular places that were known within their communities to be where people went for physical violence. So one example was because they knew there to be less cameras down there, or no cameras to be there. Disrespect, like Nadine had already mentioned, towards family and friends was a real significant trigger of violence, but that, as well as the verbal abuse, included non-verbal cues. So the quote at the bottom kind of points to that, but really it was that kind of attitude of disrespect towards a young person was justification enough for physical violence. We really found the young women to have limited impulse control and emotional regulation, so that again, in these instances of disrespect, that they really only tool that they had was physical violence. They talked a lot about people pushing your buttons, about just being so angry that you had to turn to violence, and you can see a lot more detail of that in the full report.
You also spoke about how the likelihood of them being involved in violence increased when they drank alcohol, and some of them accepted that, with one of young people talking about every time they drank, they would fight, and that was just the way it was. They accepted that, and they were okay with that. Some reduced their alcohol intake because of that, and were aware of the fact that when they drank more, that they were more likely to fight, so adapted their behaviour. So they were aware of what was going on, and they said, kind of as a whole, they found that amongst the young people they knew as well, that it increased the likelihood of being involved in violence with the effect that alcohol has on them. They also spoke about the misogyny that they face within the community, a lot from boys and young men in school, online, and also within the community. The young women reported kind of verbal abuse, mainly particularly violent and sexualized, with them being told to kind of kill themselves, lots of comments on their appearances. But I also think it's important to note that there was also a lot of internal misogyny that kind of came out when we were speaking to the young women. They had poor view of other young women, and almost try to distance themselves from other girls, talking collectively about girls, but not linking it to themselves or to their own behaviours. Um, They also didn't have much hope for the future when we kind of asked them about the changes we'd want to see. They were very much accepting that that's the way it was. It's how it's always been, and that's the way it would stay. They would like a brighter future, but they didn't see it happening, unfortunately. And then the last theme, that will be unsurprising to most of you, I'm sure, was social media. The young people brought that up to us before we even asked any of our questions on it. And it's social media is a complicated one in terms of the blurred lines between them being producers of online violent content, but also consumers of it as well. There was a lot of passive exposure to violence online, and also young people using it to coordinate violence as well and to arrange fights as such, and to use it as a platform to argue on, or to give abuse to other people. Like I said, they were both viewers and producers of the harmful content. It was there even when they weren't seeking it out. So whether it was from algorithms on their feeds, on people's stories, if it was getting sent to them by messages, it was there. It was something that was prevalent. They said they saw it all the time, every day, and that has led to the desensitization of violence on social media for them. When we're speaking at, and I think that's also the reason when we were then speaking about the filming of fights, they were unable to recognise the impact that was having and their involvement of it, because they were just filming it. They weren't actually fighting in it themselves. They also raised some issues about apps. So they were aware of what apps they were more likely to take down violent videos than others. So some of it was kind of strategic in terms of where young people post their videos, and where they can get the most views, and they know where it will stay up longer. Snapchat was also one of the main apps that was mentioned for a number of reasons. So the young people spoke about using it to create large group chats. They were having arguments from people from England. Was brought up in multiple groups again. They talked about being added to large group chats that they maybe didn't want to be involved in, and also about getting dragged into fights that way, organising it on Snapchat, talking about arranging where it will be, and leading to in-person fights as well, so that there's that blurred line of where online meets in person.
And although the girls had spoken about this kind of desensitization and really had kind of stressed that it didn't have much of an impact on them, it was clear actually the further we kind of spoke to them that it really did have a serious impact of both being filmed and the impact of that, being filmed during a physical fight, and this impact actually kind of rippled out onto families and communities, but also watching and viewing serious graphic violence. And this wasn't just fights between young people, but other types of violence online, including extreme animal cruelty. One of the groups we're talking about had a really lasting impact. And I think the quote at the bottom, "I wish I'd never seen that one," really kind of emphasized it. They were able to recall real detail about the videos that they'd seen, that obviously had left a long impact for them. One thing that was really interesting around a kind of compulsion and to use social media and to be on your phone was that young people were very much on their phones throughout the focus groups as well, despite being asked not to. And we got into a conversation with some young people, and actually they decided that they'd rather actually be on social media and involved, even if that led to in-person violence, than be bored. And the theme of kind of social media and violence as entertainment is covered a bit more in the full report. So thinking of the recommendations, first and foremost, want to kind of underline all the recommendations that we've made, that they need to be in a rights-based approach. They need to take a rights-based approach. And that really means that girls themselves and young women are really at the center of that their voices are heard loud and clearly, that they're involved in developing those solutions, and that we keep their best interests as a top priority. The first one here that we've got is that we need to know more. This research was really small scale, and I don't think Nadine or I had anticipated the report that we had. We thought we were just kind of finding out a little bit more as a background for general No Knives work, but actually, the more we heard of the young women's experiences and how similar the experiences were between the groups, we really started noticing those trends and know that it is really crucial for all of us that are working with girls and young women to pay more attention to these issues, to work out, is this a larger problem um, as well, and make sure that we're doing something about it. That the universal approach to tackling gender-based violence in schools is really important, both for tackling the misogyny that girls are experiencing, but also having that critical challenge for girls and young women themselves about the internalized misogyny, and ensuring that they understand where that narrative is coming from and about the power imbalances, the structural issues there. It was really clear to us that whole family support is needed, that we can't just work with young people to prevent violence, because if they're going home and their families are endorsing involvement in violence, we're not going to be able to prevent it. So we need that kind of wraparound support for families, making sure that parents and broader families and carers are on the same page. Mental health support for young people needs to be better, because they were saying a lot of the underlying issues that were causing violence were stemming from that poor mental health, including that emotional regulation and impulse control.
And the young people we spoke to also had limited faith in social media companies in terms of the reporting. They said it took too many steps for them to report, and they also didn't see the impact of things getting removed, or the process also being a bit opaque. We need more support for young people that are experiencing bullying. One of the kind of main takeaways that I heard from this was that young people were often turning to violence as a result of not getting the support they felt they needed. Um, they were trying to resolve low-level bullying or disrespect. And hopefully, with more support for young people that are being harmed by bullying, we can limit the transition to aggressor for these young people. We also need to support them to be more active bystanders online and understand how they can do that, to help reduce and prevent discrimination and violence on the online platform. Also feel that there needs to be an increase in knowledge and skills for parents, carers, teachers and practitioners on harmful online behaviour and its impact. Like Emily said, it's that holistic approach. It's everyone's role, and it's important that everyone has an understanding in order to help support the young people in the best way we can. Many of the young people were navigating kind of different difficult situations on social media without the help of adults, and so it's important that all adults around the young people were equipped with the knowledge and skills to support them in a open, supportive and non-stigmatizing way. And this leads us on to stage 2. So what's next for us is we are looking at working with the young women's movement and co-designing a toolkit for practitioners. And they're also going to be looking at doing a young person's facing campaign as well. So we're hoping for that to be launched in February 2025. And with our main report, we've also got a couple other things as well. So we've got our young persons report, which is written in young person friendly language, and is accessible for them. We've also got one of our online courses on our LMS system, which can be accessed via our website, which takes you through the report. It's got some extra things in there, a little bit more detail. And we also have a peer education module for violence between girls, again, based on the findings of this report, so that young people can help support other young people in facing those issues.
So that's all Nadine and I have for this afternoon. So we really want to open the floor to questions, and you can do so using the chat function, which I'm about to open and see 100 questions. Well, some people are having issues with mics. Did everybody actually manage to hear any of that? Is that the worst part? Worst time to ask is once we've got to the end, if anybody actually heard. Hopefully, yes. Does anybody have any questions? I'm just going to the other Q&A box. Katie's asked, how does preventing this type of violence link to preventing violence against women and girls, i.e. tackling misogyny and gender inequality? I think that's a really important perspective, Katie. And like we said, the misogyny was a really big issue for girls and young women, though not that they necessarily identified that immediately. And something that practitioners were questioning, the adult practitioners were questioning, was whether the increase in girls' violence was as a response to what they felt was an increase in violence against women and girls, and that young women were being violent to kind of counter that pressure, the danger that they felt. So I think there's a real close link there. Although obviously our work was focused on specifically violence between girls, I think we really need to look at it, and this kind of helps to triangulate that broader understanding of what's going on for girls and young women in Scotland, and how we can better support them. The website, Kerry, was the No Knives Better Lives website. We'll send that in a follow-up email as well, so everybody's got the link, all the resources there as well. Evelyn's asking, what age do you think it's actually appropriate to give young girls mobile phones? The earlier the access, the sooner they become curious to view lots of different images and join groups. I don't think we would have a strict answer for that. I think Nadine and I's maybe initial reaction when we were doing the focus groups was young people shouldn't have mobile phones, but I think that was a reactionary approach to what we'd heard. But actually, if we ban phones or we just restrict access, what we're actually doing is shutting down that conversation. And what young people need is better support, better education on that critical digital literacy to understand what's going on, how they can navigate that safely, because we can't hold it off forever, that they will eventually be using it. And if we don't support that usage in an open way, then there'll be trouble once they actually have it. So obviously, the platforms themselves often have age limits. I think there's a discussion to be had on whether they're the right age limits. But certainly it seems for us that actually girls needed that adult support to be able to navigate social media in a positive way. I'm just looking to see if there's any other questions.
I think there's one.
Fiona's, yeah, in our youth work, we find the behavior of parents on social media leads to a lot of issues between girls. Did you find this? Not necessarily parents on social media through this piece of research. Separately, we're doing a different piece of research specifically on social media, and some issues there have come up. The issues that we mostly found in this report were young people said that parents endorsed violence, so saying you should hit such and such or you should stick up for yourself, and equally parents role modeling violent behavior is what practitioners had told us about. So parents fighting in a school playground, for example, physically fighting. Those were the examples that we specifically heard in this work. All the questions are coming in different places. Here we go. Jane's asking, did any of the girls suggest what mental health support should look like for them? I think one of the groups were talking about being involved with counsellors, like external to school. And for some of them, they said it worked, and for some it didn't. So there really wasn't one kind of model. It just was really clear that actually the girls were having a really tough time, and a lot of this was kind of bore out of that actually they didn't feel like they could approach many adults at all. They felt like they had to deal with everything themselves, and basically they didn't know how. They didn't know any other options apart from violence. Beth has got another question here. I think Scottish British culture of girls violence is normalized. I think this will open up a great dialogue and hopefully a culture change. How do you think we could move away from this behavior that is so embedded in our culture? Great question, Beth. And I think you're right, actually, in the report, we touch on a piece of research that we found from the early 2000s. I think it was published 2001. And reading that report and the quotes from the young people there, they could have been the same young people. You know, really, the quotes were so similar and the issues that they were facing were so similar. So whether it's cyclical or it just hasn't shifted, I'm not sure. But it certainly is embedded within our culture in Scotland. And I think that healthy challenge to that of, you know, there's interest here, there's lots of you here today that are interested, and lots of other people that have approached us. about this, that actually that we move away from that, that we're able to challenge this in a positive way that tackles the underlying issues that are here. And I think that was our main reason for doing the research, is that we can actually understand why we're seeing the violence, rather than just being so shocked at the violence that we kind of push those young people away, because they aren't just those young people. Like Nadine said, the girls that we spoke to really had caused harm, and they had been harmed by others. There wasn't a line and a clear division between young people who were causing harm and and being harmed. Um, Graham's asked, was there any link between boys and or gangs and the violence from girls? I would say that no, none of the young people mentioned gangs explicitly. Some of them mentioned large friendship groups that hung about together. They didn't talk explicitly about gangs. The link with boys and violence was that boys were sometimes kind of stirring up trouble to cause that ended up causing violence, and that would again be probably recognizable to all of you on the call, where there was perhaps romantic relationships with boys, and then there were issues with those romantic relationships, and rather than the issue being with the boy who was at the center, it was actually the girls kind of in the periphery fighting each other about the issue. um, I think that would probably, I don't know, Nadina, if you can think of anything else explicitly of the violence linking with boys.
No, I think just like you said, they didn't bring them up often. I think it was only a couple of groups that maybe did that we spoke to. And when we did, it was more them kind of enticing each other, little comments that kind of really played a role in misogyny that came up rather than the gangs and the violence.
I've just seen a couple more questions. Philip is asking, what can other youth organisations do to help support your research further and or support the recommendations mentioned in the report? I think the first step, Philippa, would be sharing. Like we said, we've done the young person's version. I know reports aren't also for all young people. We are sharing it in kind of bite-sized way, or will be on our Instagram page as well. I think for anybody who's working with young people, we really want this to be a call to action, to start talking to girls, to start having these conversations. Even if the girls that you work with maybe aren't involved in violence, let's talk about that disrespect and what that leads to, how we manage our reactions around disrespect. How can we get more young women to just walk away from conflict in that way, or to have the confidence to brush that off? Really difficult for teenagers. We appreciate that. But any of those kind of things we think would be really beneficial, as well as youth organizations specifically. How can we work together with other organizations, working with parents, with broader families? How can we work together as that coalition that's going to wrap around families to prevent violence? Sarah's asked, how wide will the next stage of research go? Um, how can existing data be used to dig a little deeper? For example, health wellbeing census, planet youth data. Good question. We don't have any money for a next stage of research at this point. Like Nadine said, the next stage that we're embarking on at the moment is a partnership with Young Women's Movement to do a piece of co-design with a small group of young women. We're interested in hearing from other people if if they have money for more research or would like to be involved. We certainly would. I think it goes certainly further than violence as well. Some of the findings in the social media really interesting. In the full report, we do have references to other bits of research, like the health behavior in school children, school age children from Scotland, and what findings that had, as well as the growing up in Scotland and things like that. Claire asked, were the girls that you spoke to from various social economic backgrounds? Yes, we aren't claiming that the group was fully representative of all girls in Scotland. Certainly wasn't. We spoke to 4 groups. What I think Nadine and I were really struck by was that how similar those groups were and what they said to us. You know, sometimes we were leaving groups and saying that's nearly word for word what another group had said. So this is why we really want practitioners to go out there, have that conversation, why we think there needs to be that further research that is with a much broader spectrum of girls, that is representative of girls and young women in Scotland to make sure that we're capturing all those different experiences. I'm conscious that it is one. Nadine and I can stay on for answering a few more questions as well. Somebody else has asked about getting parents and carers on board. Do you know if this has been done and successful in the past? As some parents I've known encourage their children not to back down with anyone and encourage the young person to take revenge. That is the kind of findings that we had as well. As for done and successful, not necessarily. Having explicit case studies, I don't know, Nadine, do you have any?
No, not specifically. That claim to kind of been done and successful. But like you said, that's definitely a theme that we found the young people we were speaking to. And I think it is there's such a common phrase, if someone hits you, hit them back. And I feel like that's ingrained to a lot of young people from a young age. So it is looking at how do we unpick that. And again, if we don't have the parents and carers on board, then I think Emily, you said earlier about you can do all the work, but then when you send them home, if they still get that influence then there needs to be that whole approach.
And I don't think it's a difficult one either. I think for funding structures maybe don't often allow this kind of working. Would hope that wouldn't be the barrier to this, but we know that parents and carers care and love their children. You know, that's what all we need to get them on board, because actually we want young people to be safe, and so do they. So actually the winning point and how we can join up is already there. It's just making sure that we actually do that work and that we don't let kind of remits and awkward funding cycles put us off. Are there any further questions? I try not to miss any on the different bits. Oh, Gus has just asked now, is there a facility available similar to Medics Against Violence where someone could go out and go over a presentation to discuss these issues with young females and give them guidance alongside other partnership agencies? Unfortunately, we just don't have capacity within our team to do individual visits, but we do have the young person's report. And to be honest, you're best placed as the practitioner that already works with young people, have already got established relationships to have those conversations. Young people were really emphasizing what they wanted was trusting, loving, non-judgmental places to go and adults to talk to, where they could confide in them about ongoing conflict or issues that they were having, and that they would be met with a loving response that wasn't judgy and it wasn't shouting and it wasn't full of pressure. That's really what they were looking for. And you already hopefully have that relationship with young people. So a best place to do that. The work that we'll be doing with Young Women's Movement will have kind of more guidance for practitioners on work that they can do with young people as well. And that will be coming early next year. Just looking for any final questions. Last call for any questions. Last call. We'll send a follow-up email and we'll have the links to everything there, the full report, the young person's version of the report, the e-learning module, and also the peer education resources. But please do get in touch with us if you have any further questions or want to work with us further on any of this. We'd love to work with more people on this and broaden the action. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank
Enjoy the
you.
rest of your afternoon.